Okay, so lecture three, we're going to be talking about the power of the breath.
Mhm.
My name is Joe Rowley Flynn. I'm a spiritualist, trance medium, and tutor, and I'm here with Penny Hayward. Do you want to introduce yourself, Penny?
Sure. I'm Penny Hayward. I'm a medium. I'm a tutor. I'm a researcher. I'm an inspirer. It's just ever growing, but I certainly have a passion for um, looking into psi phenomena and mediumship.
Wonderful, wonderful. So today we're going to talk about the power of the breath, and I know
Mhm.
that you've been looking into a lot about that subject, and really, the power of the breath. We don't breathe enough, really, do we? I think that's the first thing. We don't breathe enough.
Comes naturally, but we don't do it right.
Exactly, yeah. And when we're told to breathe, we don't breathe properly. So, I think that would be a good place to start, really. So, do you want to just, yes, what's your understanding with? Obviously, we're looking at this from the aspect of trance and how that can move us into that altered state, really.
Mm. Yeah, so it's sort of joking, not joking, isn't it, really? Look, I think that in our modern times, we've become more anxious and we breathe much more shallow and
Mm,
quick. And it increases our heart rate and, has knock-on effects to our well-being. So that's just us as human beings. So, we're born into this world. Our soul is encased within this physical body, and we get a slap on the bottom as we enter this world to start breathing. And supposedly it comes naturally from there until our last. And we don't really, I guess my point is, put enough focus on the breath and the power of the breath when it comes to our mediumship as well as our well-being. So looking at it in terms of trance, and yes, I have done some research. I do reading, and I do personally experiment on myself, um, and look at other people's research, read other books.
mm,
And what I've come to recognize is that there is a correlation between the way in which we breathe and our altered state of consciousness. And in terms of the trance state, the more gentle and slow our and deep our breath is, the better. So
yeah.
when I say deep, what I mean is taking the breath gently to the bottom of the lungs and back out,
Hmm.
letting your by focusing on your breath, observing where that breath is, and then taking it to the bottom of the lungs and out, then allowing that breath to find its own natural rhythm. So there are gazillions of different techniques of breathing for meditation. Breathe in for 3, breathe out for 5, and do this and do that. And I just hyperventilate or get dizzy in most of those. Um, and I know for Kundalini, there's different types of breath action, which are very deep breaths. Um, but for the trance state, I've observed that the deeper, slower, and more gentle the breath, the better.
Yeah.
And it allows it almost allows my conscious mind to step aside, and the presence of the consciousness, I should really say, of the guide to blend, um, to be able to assume a certain amount of control and presence within that time.
Yes.
And there have been times where, as my own human consciousness returns into the focal point, that there's almost like a question of I been breathing, like you lose the sense of breathing. So, you are because you're still alive and in this world, but it may be slower. And of course, as you may know, yogis in their meditation, their breath slows right down and their heartbeat slows right down with it to a point at which they can appear almost dead because the breath and the heart rate is so slow.
Yes, yeah.
But I'm not recommending that.
Let's not recommend that one, no.
I think that will take a lot longer to try
Yes,
to see.
yes. You know,
But what
that's
about you? What about you?
yeah. For me, I think in general, the power of the breath itself is so important, in life. Um, and it naturally starts to calm our brain waves down, and it helps us to shift into those altered states. And I feel the same, when I sit for trance, I'm aware that as my guide and my team start to come close, my breathing starts to naturally change, and I'm not saying the spirit world are doing that, but it's just that it's my consciousness that's changing. And as my consciousness changes, I've noticed my breathing pattern starts to alter. And when I've seen a lot of trance mediums work, the breath is a lot more slower. You can start
Mm,
to feel that changing with them. So, for me, that I find that really interesting what you've just
mm,
said. Uh, and I feel the same. The more that we focus on the slowness of the breath, the more that we can start to move into that energy of the trance state itself. Um,
mm.
and it becomes more passive.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
helps me to let go, like you said, conscious mind. And so I think it's extraordinary. There's been times where I have tried to do the counting of the breath, but
Mm,
sometimes I find that can keep the conscious mind still there. I think we just
exactly.
need to be natural with that breath. And I find that as we start to relax, then we start to flow into that breath more. It starts to change. But I've also found that the breath helps me to surrender, to blend.
Mm. Oh yeah,
And
totally.
that that has been really useful. And I often
Mm,
say to different people, when you start to feel that blending and the conscious mind wants to start being nosy,
mm,
start to focus on the breath and help the breath
exactly.
move you into that blending. It's so beautiful and
Yeah.
it really is helpful.
Yeah, and I think that by putting the focus on observing the breath initially to allow it to slow down and find its own natural rhythm is a distraction for the conscious mind because it's got the job of watching the breath and going, oh, and sort of moving into a calmer state of being. And just on a logical level in the discussion that we're having, if you think about it, whenever you're nervous, whenever you're fearful, whenever you're anxious, the breath is shorter and higher up.
Yeah, yeah,
And it puts you into a more alert state. So just on a logical level, if you think about it like that, if your breath is shorter and higher up and deeper for that like reason, like a pant almost, then you're keeping yourself in a more alert state of awareness as opposed to a passive state of being. So just on a logical level, it makes sense, doesn't it?
absolutely. Really does. It,
Mm,
it's just fascinating how simple that is, that sometimes we don't need to get so caught up in, do this or do this or do that. And I find a lot of people when they want to explore trance in the altered states, um, it's like the conscious mind's constantly wanting to understand what's going on.
Yeah.
You ask them to just focus on the breath and move with the breath into that place of relaxation. um, it just starts to become more powerful, I
Yeah.
find. And I
Yeah.
find that the breath starts to align us with the energy itself. Like
Absolutely.
you said, if on a logical side, when you're breathing faster, it for me the breath is connected in with the energy. That's what
Yeah.
I've found, and so it starts to create that particular altered state.
Mm.
You
Or
know,
not.
yeah, or not. It can make, yeah, if you're in a fearful state, for instance, I think there's a lot of fear that comes in with unfoldment sometimes, and with trance as well, because you're learning to let go. So I often say, just, the more you can relax that breath and calm yourself, the more you're going to move into that flow state is what I call it, that flow, that blending, that surrendering. But if
Mm.
got a bit of fear there, it's interesting. You can start to see that change becomes a bit more active,
Yeah.
and
It
you know
does. Yeah,
that the
because
mind is still there.
it's
Yeah,
that nervousness and adrenaline, isn't it, which then creates that heightened state
yeah,
of alertness, shall we say, and the breath in that way. But something I also want to just mention here is it is completely unnecessary to breathe like an old dog that's sleeping.
no,
You know what I mean? You
yes,
know, people that are like, "Mm,"
yeah,
and sort of like making these very loud breathing noises. And I'm sorry, that doesn't mean that you're going into a deeper state.
no,
It's
no,
um it's just being noisy breathing. I don't hear myself breathing on a day-to-day basis unless I'm actually anxious, which I do get sometimes,
yeah,
or I'm out of breath because I tried to run and I can't do that anymore. So I'm not really hearing my breath in a normal state of being, so it's completely unnecessary to be having these extraordinarily loud breathing noises when we're going into an altered state.
yeah. I
Just
think that
putting it out there.
yeah, no, I agree. I think it keeps the conscious mind still there,
Mm,
and it becomes forced. And I feel that the trance states itself should be a very graceful surrender, very
mm,
gentle. And so, if someone is breathing a bit too heavily, then it's just about changing it into that more natural breath, because we don't breathe like that on a day-to-day basis, do we?
yeah,
So,
it actually froze when you did that. Yeah,
yeah,
it is that like
yeah,
very loud breathing. And it's more even the loud exhale more than anything because we can sometimes make a bit of a noise on a sharp intake. Like
yeah,
when we're talking, we're
yes,
drawing in breath quickly in
yeah,
this state of awareness. But it's those long growly kind of breaths. And it's very irritating for everybody else, I
mm,
have to say that. And so nevertheless, the calmer, the deeper, and the slower the breath, the better
yeah.
is basically the message.
Yeah, I feel the more you're going to go more into that surrendering state, really, with the spirit
Mm.
world through the breath. It's so simple, isn't it? I think that's
Mm.
what's so beautiful about this. There's no, like I said, added technique, or you've got to do something so complicated to achieve an
Mm.
altered state. It's just the breath. It's just the pattern of the breath, and I just
Mm.
find it fascinating that I think it was there's a medium called Eileen Garrett. I think she studies the
Mm.
breath, didn't she? And I
Mm.
think she found for every psychic faculty there was a different speed of breath or a different pattern of
I
breathing.
would agree with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's really fascinating
Mm.
when we move into those different altered states and awaken those different experiences, that she came to understand that. So
Mm.
I just say
Well,
to everyone, study the breath, study
yeah.
and watch others when they're moving into that altered state. See if you can feel
Mm.
where they are with that breath in their altered state.
Yeah. And certainly there is research that's been done on the breath, which talks to that, what you've said about Eileen Garrett. And it was something that I discovered for myself as
Mm.
well. And then I found these books on the breath and breathing and how there are, like I said, for Kundalini, there's a certain breathing technique to move into that state. In yoga, in different yoga techniques, there's and martial arts and things, breath is very key to the movement and to the power of the action within that. And so it is in mediumship. There is different forms of breathing for different states of awareness because every form of mediumship is in a different frequency, a different state of focus, awareness, consciousness. So wonderful. Well, I hope
Wonderful.
that helps
Excellent.
people.
Yes. And, again, please feel free to just share your thoughts on the breath, how it's perhaps changed you and your unfoldment and development. But thank you, Penny. It's been wonderful. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you.